What's good, everybody? Pete here, Spawn Fly Fish. And when you think trophy brown trout, I know a lot of you think fall, but guess what? They eat all year round. So what we have coming this spring, you've got all these juvenile bait fish. You want to catch a trophy, feed them what they're looking for. So grab your stuff, grab your vise, and let's have some fun. All right, in the vise today, we have the HR430 from Ahrex. And this is one of their tube single hooks, but today we're using it as a trailer hook. As you can see, nice big gap, nice shape to the hook, straight eye. It's going to do everything that we need it to do, and then some. So let's get some thread started. Today I've got some 6/0 uni, and color is Camel. Pretty simple. We are tying a juvenile brown trout today. There's going to be a lot going on, but if you just take your time, stick with it, it's not too crazy. Alright, so ending my thread just above the hook barb there, give myself a little indication of where I want to start this fly. So today we are going to be using a bunch of this Spawn Select Pintail, and as you can see, I've got the tip trimmed out there, or at least I've got the fibers going back where I want the tie-in to be. And so I'm going to tie that with the concave side facing the hook, which of course will put the convex or top upward facing the sky. Trim out those tag fibers, and then just finish wrapping down that feather. Come back for a second pass, really make sure it's not going anywhere, and get it out of the way. Alright, so first thing we're going to do, get our fingertips just a little wet. I've always got that little bowl of water on my tying station. So now as you see, those fibers aren't going anywhere. They're going to hold flowing in the proper direction for us. And then it's just a matter of wrapping. That first wrap is going to want to turn on you. We don't want that. So if you go back slightly before you start your wrap, it'll help control that just a little bit. And now we just keep wrapping. So as you see now, I'm not on the side of the quill. I am on the inner flat portion of the quill. And so what that does is really traps down those fibers. Much smaller profile, much sleeker. And when we're tying juvenile bait fish, that's not a bad thing, right? These things aren't usually very plump. They're pretty streamlined. And as far as coloration goes, they're not real vibrant. They're definitely not in the spawning colors like we see on a bunch of the hero shots of big brown trout or anything. And the same goes for rainbows and any other trout species. When you're tying juveniles to catch those big monster trophies, they're not real bright. They don't have a lot of color to them. They need to be able to blend in and avoid other predators, so keep that in mind. Alright, pretty simple tail so far. Let's get into some body work. And keeping in mind we don't need anything super bright, we've got some UV2 roll yarn, and this is fluorescent Oregon cheese. So it's yellow, of course, and all that good stuff, but we're tying it inside, and then we're going to come with another feather. So it's not going to be this obnoxious yellow, it's just going to have hints of yellow. And much like our own recognition of a pattern or a color, whatever it might be that triggers our memory, we're looking to do the same thing with these trout. So it doesn't have to be an exact imitation all the time, nor does it have to be something that we think is what it looks like. Go ahead and take some time, look up these juveniles, see what their real coloration is, and then maybe rethink your streamer structure. Alright, let's get this wrapped up in some touching wraps, nothing crazy. Just again, this is going to give us that profile, that underbody if you will, and that color recognition. So win-win. Alright, right about there. I'm going to leave myself plenty of room on this because we have got some more material to add, of course. And 3, let's go with 4 wraps to tie that down. I'm just going to get this back, get my thread in the front, make a little bit of a cleaner trim out there. And any of these goofy fibers sticking out, Now's the time to get those trimmed out. Alright, like so. Nothing to it. Alright. Keep in mind when we finish this, it's going to be sitting hook point up. But for ease of tying and to avoid that point as much as possible with that thumb, we're just tying it in this orientation for right now. Alright, so we've got a couple more things to go here. We've got another feather, a little bit of flash, and then we're going to come on the top with some Marabou as a dorsal coloration. So let's get our second feather going, I guess. Alright. So we've got another pintail. Look at the beautiful barring on these feathers. Just amazing. I'm going to come right in like so. Again, same orientation as that tail feather. All these feathers will be tied in the same way. That is to say, with the concave side facing the actual hook shank, and then the convex facing outward. Get that tied in, like so. Alright, same deal. Wet fingertips go make this a lot easier. Alright, those fibers out of there. There we are. Now it's a simple matter of wrapping these bad boys. There we go. It's always nice when they play in an agreement with you, but it's not always the case. So when you're working with feathers, if you want to get better, I would say just have more patience. Take your time. Our tendency is to rush things. I don't know why, but if you want to avoid mistakes, slowing down, that's a good way. Alright, now I've got my clean V here for a clean tie off. So let's go ahead and situate that. 4 wraps, 1 in front. Nothing to it. Trim out the tag. Alright, so we do have our little Stomfo comb. And we're just going to brush these fibers to make sure they're evenly distributed around the shank. And now watch this move. I'm just going to come back on that feather a little bit. And this is creating the space I need, right? So we have full coverage already, but this is going to create the space that I need for these last 2 elements. So as you can see here, Krystal flash in gold. And I know we've been talking about keeping this pretty mundane, pretty flat coloration. And so since we're not using anything real bright or obnoxious in the fly, a little flash is going to add some realism to this pattern. So I'm just going to come in on the top side, fold that flash over itself on the thread, and then I simply transfer that to the top, get it tied in. I'm going to just rotate this to see if I'm on top, and I am. And then I'll split these around the hook point as best I can for now and get them pulled under the jaw. And at this point now, once they're all underneath here, I can kind of get an odd grab, if you will. And then all I need to do is kind of measure where I want to cut, give an angle cut, done. So the last thing I'm going to put on top here, I've got some UV brown Marabou from Fish Hunter. So I'm just going to strip the bottom of this quill and then get into the meat of the fibers I actually want to use for this dorsal top or coloration, whatever you want to call it. Just trying to add a little bit more of that recognition to this fly. It's a decent amount, not crazy though. Just going to lay that on top, match up where our flash and that feather end, and get it as close as possible. Let's check, see if we're on top. Looks like we're on top. So I'll go ahead and split that Marabou, much like I did with the flash, so that it sits on both sides of the hook point. And then a few more solidifying wraps. Pull that Marabou back, get my thread in front, just so when I trim this out, it's a cleaner transition for me, and I have less to clean up right here. That's about as clean as that gets, honestly. So it worked. Who'd have thunk it? And then finish tying down that trimmed end. There we go. Time for everybody's favorite, the whip finish. So as you can see, there's a lot of material, but it's nothing that's difficult. It's just technique. Master every technique. That would be my advice. Boom. 2 whip finishes, trim out your thread, and let's get some head cement on there for good measure. And the head cement today, we do have the Loon hard head clear, and we're just going to cover all these thread wraps. A little bit goes a long way when you're doing head cement. Keep that in mind. I'm not painting the side of a house here. I'm just covering up the thread and making sure where that knot is underneath is definitely covered with some head cement. And that's it. Good to go. One thing I'll say, make sure you put the cap back on. Alright, so now we're going to switch and get into the front portion, which is a Spawn 20mm 60-degree jig shank. And of course, we've got the Spawn 7.5mm slotted football bead in gold. So one thing, tying this hook point up. So at this point, I'll slip the shank in so that the whole thing now rides in line. It is going to keel properly. Now I can pop this out of the streamer head and flip this over as though I'm going to go ahead and put it in here. But if you look, if I try to put this in here, do you see how goofy that back end becomes for me? That's not going to be a fun thing to tie on. So number 2 head comes out, number 1 head goes back in, and now when I grab this in my vise, you'll see there's room behind here for that hook and rear portion to just lay and not be in the way, and that's a big deal. So now at this point we're just going to readjust the camera a little bit so everything is back in focus for you. Alright, so now we want to solidify that bead placement. We're going to use some .025 lead-free wire for that. I'm going to give myself a little bit more tag end on my side, or the beginning side, than normal, and you'll see why here in a second. Let me get 6 or 7 wraps of this stuff on here, and then I'm going to trim out the front only, like so. Use my scissor and around that cut edge over, like everything's still normal. Put that into the back cavity of the bead. The bulk is, of course, on the outside of the shank, so that this shank and the hook still ride hook point up. That's the key. But this little gap here, I could go ahead and tie that arm down now, but I'm going to have a missing gap. Well, that's why I left the tag end of wire. Just go backwards a little bit, so now you'll see when I push that down, it's going to line up to the back side of that wire, and this will be a smooth underbody, smooth transition from front to top, or front to back. So at this point, trim that back section. 2 seconds here to round that cut edge over. Your thread will thank you. Alright, back in business. Make sure that hook eye is staying out of the way there. So now, get some thread again, and we're going to start this behind the weighted wire, and we are going to manipulate this so that I can get my thread as far back as I can get it on this arm. So now when I come over, I can just tie forward, bring that arm right down behind our weighted wire, and you see how smooth of a transition that will be for our body material. Is it a must? No. But is it the difference between an okay and a good fly? Yes, by all means. Alright, so now that we have all this in place, I'm going to start working on some soft wraps of 45-degree angle here, and this is going to get the non-lead or lead-free wire in position. Here's a busted thread, no worries. No worries. We don't cry over spilled milk or busted thread, either one. Alright, I'm just going to get this started on a couple wraps. Here's the end that broke. At this point, I'll give it some tension so it just pulls everything tight again. And when I tie this down, it will be as though nothing even happened, like so. All right, I'm back to wrapping all this down. And now I've got enough of that 45-degree action on my wires. I'll just go ahead and come in with some straight wraps now, pull all that down, and really, really strengthen everything that's going on here. All right, so this is where some personality or some of your own decision making comes into play. You don't have to put a feather here, but it's really going to complete the connection and make this whole fly make more sense when it's finished, especially when it gets wet. If we don't put the feather here, we'll have this front feather that kind of tapers down and then a second taper. If we put this feather right here in the back, we won't have any of that gap. It'll just be one continuous taper, and that's what we are going for. So again, got that pintail feather, all that beautiful barring on there. Really want to utilize that, and that's what's going to kind of hide that yellow underneath. It's going to dull down some of the effect of the flash, and it definitely breaks up the pattern and looks like something that's natural versus a big bright red and colored up baby brown trout, because there really aren't too many of those. All right, again, getting those fibers wet, training them toward the back, and I'll make that first little move, if you will, to the rear as I start my first wrap around, just to get that feather on the inside flat portion of that quill. I'm going to have some fibers going on the wrong side there. No biggie. I would just back that feather up, get them situated so that I don't have trapped fibers as I wrap. And as you see, some of these fibers are really long, so it's something you'll just have to keep in mind. And again, I want to be a better fly tyer. What do? Well, step one, slow down. Everybody's in a hurry to get these flies tied, to get out fishing. I get it. But just take your time, enjoy the process, understand the process, and it'll help you be a better fisher as well. Tie off that feather, and really pull down on that last wrap, going nowhere, get it out of there. And let's get back to this comb real quickly. I'm just going to make sure we've got even distribution of those fibers, because once I've tied in my chenille, can't really change any of this. So now's the time if you're going to do it. There we go. Back to our fluorescent Oregon cheese UV2 row yarn. Trim out a little spot just for a slightly cleaner start to this, and like so. Check your thread wraps, make sure you're getting back to your previous tie off so you have no gaps, no bumps, one continuous fly. And let's fill this bad boy up much like we did in the rear portion. One thing you do want to keep in mind, however much space you needed in that back section, we want to leave at least that much, if not just a little more. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and tie off on the bottom here, and that's exactly where I want that chenille to end. Let me get 3-4 wraps, and then I'll tilt this back over so you guys can see what we got going on again. Nothing to it. Trim this out, and we'll clean this up. Like so. Alright. Really fun fly, and you can absolutely keep this in mind when you're tying juvenile rainbow trout, juvenile brook trout, whatever it might be. Just switch the colors a little bit and you're already there. Alright, so now let's see what we got going here. We need all that to lay down. I'm just checking where my hook sits, that these next sections of feather are still evenly distributed across and around that hook point. And yes, once we pop it out of the vise, all that might change slightly, but the more we pay attention to it now, the less we have to adjust later. Alright, so first thing, we're going to match what we did in the back with some of this gold crystal flash. And again, just going to fold that over my thread like so, bring it up to the shank and tie it down on top. And as far as the cut on this one, I don't need it to reach all the way to the back. I only need it to reach just past the hook point a little bit, so if you will, 3/4 of the way back of the totality of the fly length. Trim off a couple of those oddballs, and so once this is all tied in, that'll be the color effect of that flash, which is just enough because there is some scale and different movement that comes off the body of those juveniles, which does kind of bring attention to the big fish. All right, so now we've got one last pintail feather and then that marabou on top again, but we want to add a little hot spot, if you will, and we're going to do that in the form of some bright red gills. So this is another Fish Hunter Spey marabou feather. This time, however, we are using some hot red. Any red will do. Just get a nice little bit here, and we don't need a bunch for this, so I'm going to go ahead and pinch off the tips, and then I can just directly tie in to the length I want for these gills, which is minimal to say the least. There it is. I'm going to tie that in right underneath, and you could by all means splay this out to the sides if you really wanted to. The whole point of it though is just to be in there and give them something to key in on. And again, based on memory and recognition, we're just giving it to them as much as possible. Trim out those tags, voila, and finish tying down the butts of that little hot spot there. Looks pretty good. And now let's get our last pintail feather tied in. Man, these are some beautiful feathers. Josh has been hand sorting these. He's done just an amazing job. It would drive me absolutely bonkers having to sort these one by one. And of course I would get distracted and try to tie something real quick. So thank you, Josh. There we go. Trim out that tag and a couple more thread wraps. Really, really solidify that feather. And let's wrap. Wet fingers, pinch those fibers. Tell them where to go. They'll listen. And that backwards move, and then we can start to wrap. So all these fibers, you see they're pretty long now on this last feather. So take your time. You really don't need any trapped fibers. I think it's just, it happens, but it doesn't need to happen. There we go. And again, keeping that quill so that I'm wrapping on the inner flat portion is really going to kind of keep the profile down for me, and that is what I'm looking for. And that is fully utilizing all of the fibers on that feather. Tie off right up against the bead here at this point for the most part, so go ahead and give it 4 good wraps, and a very clean trim out would be beneficial here, like so. A little trim work, nothing to worry about though. And before we add that last bit of dorsal marabou, that dorsal coloration, let's go ahead and just comb these fibers for that even distribution. One loose fiber there, not sure where it came from, but it's no longer an issue. Alright, so now our last chunk of UV brown marabou coming into play here, and hopefully these fibers are long enough. Yeah, they'll be great. Just a slightly bigger bunch this time than what we used in that tail section, only because we're not just covering more distance lengthwise, we do want it to come over the top a little bit more than that last chunk too. And so I'm just looking at where that flash ends. I'm going to line this up to match with the ends of that flash. Coming right on top. That grip is everything, so don't let go for at least 3 wraps. 1, 2, 3. Let's make it 4 just in case. And at that point, I will check to make sure I'm staying on top of my fly, which is where all that needs to be. If it is, go ahead and kind of situate that. You can get your fingers wet again, like we have been through most of this fly. Oh, look at that, starting to look like something. Get these tags trimmed out on those butts of that Marabou. So as you can see, it's going to be a little bit of a mess in there right behind that bead. So that's all right. We're going to tie it all down. Nobody will know. Again, just a little more water on my fingertips. Really get this back where I want it. And let's finish wrapping this down. I'm not too concerned with that little bit of fluff that's still showing there, because we've got one more step. It's going to completely clean all that up. So let's get a couple whip finishes in here. There's one, and here's our second. Trim that out. Now we are going to just kiss this with a little bit of head cement. Cover up those thread wraps, especially where that whip finish knot lands, which on this one is underneath. And then we'll get into some eyes real quickly, just to add that final little touch of realism. And I don't know about you, but big streamers, when you're chasing these trophy fish, a lot of times I think the eyes play an important role, but it's completely subjective, I guess. There we go. Got that nice and tidied up. Everything's cemented. Nothing is going to move. As far as the eyes, you pick the eyes that are going to make you the happiest. I want something, again, with a little bit of a hot spot kind of reaction. So I've got some reddish, orangish eyes. And the size of this is the most important part, I guess. And so if you're looking for something outrageous, you could go 8 mil, but I'm trying to match the size of the overall fly, so I'm just going with some 6 millimeter eyes. And I haven't let that cement dry completely, but since we're on camera, we're just going to roll with it. I've got some Superglue Gel. I'm putting 2 little daps or dots, whatever you want to call them, on either side. I will do your side first. I'm just going to pop that bad boy in place, like so, and I'll match it up on my side as best as I can. And once this super glue is completely dry, I'm going to be coming back in with some UV resin, but I'm not going to make you guys sit here for 20 minutes and wait for that to happen. So this is the juvenile brown trout, and this is what the trophy brown trout want to eat. So, hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please hit like, please hit subscribe, grab some Pintail, and we will see you on the water.